box. So the final major category of this chapter is post-purchase satisfaction. Let's discuss how satisfaction is determined and its various outcomes. Post-purchase satisfaction is the extent that consumers feel satisfied with a purchase, usually based on how performance met expectations. Keep in mind, when we say post-purchase, really we should be also saying post-decision anything, post-experience, but you get the general sense, of course, that this is, again, that issue. We're a marketing class, so we're going to focus on this, but it's applicable in all sorts of applications. But let's go. The first type of satisfaction process we will discuss can take place right after the purchase. Post-purchase dissonance. Post-purchase dissonance occurs when a consumer has doubts or anxiety regarding the wisdom of a purchase made and is a function of the following. Usually often the degree of commitment or irrevocability of the decision, the importance of the decision to the consumer, the difficulty of choosing among alternatives, and the individual's tendency to just experience anxiety. You can effectively boil these down to risk, whether of opportunities foregone or actual potential harm. Those who show stronger involvement are more likely to give strong weight to the various risks. So you can imagine how buying a box of cereal that's easy to return or just keep if you can't will likely have much less dissonance than, say, you signing off on a particular school program or getting airplane tickets. As a choice connection, this is often why we might shut down and forego a decision when we have choice overload, because we're trying to avoid this. In sum, post-purchase dissonance is when our cognitions conflict over a purchase and reflects our perception of the risk outcomes. But all is not lost. If consumers are experiencing post-purchase dissonance, they use one or more of these strategies to reduce the conflict. Here are 4 such strategies. So you can try to increase the desirability of the brand you had purchased. You can decrease the desirability of rejected alternatives. You can decrease the importance of the purchase decision. Or you can, of course, reverse it altogether and just return before actual use. So these strategies should seem familiar because they're often used when consumers feel any other form of dissonance, such as liking a brand but learning something bad about it. So any type of conflict. So as an activity, pick a product, particularly one that's more likely to be risky, such that it's more likely to create that dissonance. In what ways could an organization encounter or encourage each of these consumer strategies for a consumer? So here's a quick visual example of buyer's remorse. This episode parodies the fan following of the McDonald's McRib sandwich. Homer gets the last ribwich, and all the other proverbial ribheads beg him for it. The following ribwich fan offers the lease to his car for the ribwich. Not only does he remind Homer about his daughter Lisa at her spelling bee, but also can give you another way to remember post-purchase dissonance. Our second satisfaction process is based on use, the performance of the product and the experience itself compared with our expectations. The book gives you a table of terms to suggest the type of post-purchase evaluation we might have based on that comparison. Key things to remember: that expectations are built, they just don't come out of thin air. We use the information we have to decide what we think will happen. We use past experiences, our memories, scripts, etc. Consider what should happen, when, and the likelihood of certain outcomes. For example, you may know a particular place tends to run out of the pie flavor you like. So non-satisfaction with figures versus, say, dissatisfaction where it was worse than you thought was going to happen. Expectations are both subjective and culturally driven. Again, we come to learn what we should expect. Some have higher consensus in society, such as you learn a fellow shopper should not be slapping you in the face under most circumstances, or that a box of crackers should not have spiders in it. Likewise, you also learn the types of ways services may take place. Whether you'll have a single server who always checks in on you, or do you have to be loud and really signal to get someone to come over? Hey, don't you want my money? Next, outcomes build expectations for future encounters. Your satisfaction, dissatisfaction, or non-satisfaction each build up the reservoir of experiences that help you evaluate future encounters. Keep in mind how consumers aren't just computers. We process the experience and may discount or embellish memories and expectations. After all, we just spoke the ways we can belatedly change our evaluated criteria due to post-purchase dissonance, to move the goalpost, so to speak. So in sum, expectations might be a matter of perception and are inherently subjective, but are very real in their consequences when consumers use those expectations to determine their satisfaction level. There are many ways a consumer might judge the performance of that product or experience. Here are three big categories. So instrumental performance relates to the extent the product or experience gave the expected utility. So for a good, it's often, oops, that's not what I needed. For a good, it would often be the physical functioning of the product. Consumers will often need to estimate this for services and ideas because there's no tangible good. Bear in mind, physical doesn't just mean tangible or visible either. It's simply the utility of a product offering. For example, a computer program is providing utility when it operates and delivers the proper questions to complete your tax return. Symbolic performance relates to aesthetic or image enhancement performance. Affective performance refers to the emotional responses that owning or using the product or outlet provides. So key is you can see how these criteria are all based on the consumer's expectations and subjective assessment. And that, of course, you can also just mix and match all of these. Now let's talk further how consumers perceive these expectations for performance. Let's talk quality, or rather qualities. So what is quality? From a marketing perspective, quality means a product's ability to satisfy a customer's needs or requirements according to their expectations. So often we think more in terms of qualities is better because they're usually broken into multiple parts. But you can take a look at your computer or perhaps a car. In what ways would you determine if it was high quality or not? Would your friend or family member agree? What about for your term project or your organization? What elements would determine how your customer sees whether it is high or low quality? Quality are the factors that determine post-purchase satisfaction and are therefore relative, subjective, and based on the consumer. So when we say qualities are relative, not all qualities are essentially equally desirable in a product. So speed is of the essence for fast food, but will not be for a fancy restaurant. Quality is subjective in the sense that consumers may evaluate quality differently. What counts as quality for one person may not be for another, such as a person loving the attention from a salesperson, while the other would prefer a more hands-off approach from sales personnel. A particular speed at which something is happening may be deemed fast or slow depending on the consumer as well. Finally, quality is based on that customer in the sense that customers have different needs. So some customers may see services as having prompt attention and a clear, loud voice. Others, that their coffee cup at their local diner never goes dry is their signal for quality. So as an activity, how might a customer determine a quality for your product, whatever that might be, for your organization or just maybe something you choose? How might it vary across segments? So a way to understand post-purchase evaluation and customer satisfaction is to anticipate the ways customers evaluate the quality of your product. It's important to try to list the standards, that is the evaluate criteria, they are measuring your consumption solution against. So here are some examples of a list of qualities a set of customers might be evaluating a product on. Can you guess the type of product or product category for each? So go ahead, write them down. Make a couple guesses in fact. The answers are written in the notes section. But once you've done these and checked on your response, go ahead and pick another product, perhaps one for your organization or another like it. What qualities would you choose for your product? How could you improve on them? Notice if you provided your target market with a survey that asked them to rate your product on a particular set of factors, would they even recognize them? Would you both agree what they were? The more vague the qualities are, the more likely you may not be adequately capturing how exactly customers are evaluating your product. So not to say they always can say what they actually want, but it doesn't hurt. You can see how product 2 is a bit more vague and is likely harder to guess than say product 1 or 5. Keep in mind if you do have a very innovative product, then consumers may not always be able to guess. However, they should be able to recognize that they match once they are told about the product. In past classes, we've had new products that may take a couple guesses, or it's just a matter of having a sufficiently diverse group. Either way, when you take the time to really think through the qualities, people do and are actually able to guess. So for example, a group was designing a discrete carrying case for hygiene products, had sufficiently strong qualities that someone did guess it after some thought. And it was a bit of a taboo product, so it was actually very good that we had it. And that's why it's also important to have a group with a variety of experiences. Had to have someone who actually used said products and was not shy about speaking up about it. So here's a nice chart to show the processes that you already likely know in your head. Your product either meets or exceeds expectations. What might a consumer do? All these are basically in the blue box, for example. There are many different ways to track customer satisfaction. You can likely think of surveys to capture beliefs, tracking sales to look towards, say, repeat purchases, or if consumers are using more kinds. It may be based on a variety of items, or it may be based on perhaps a single measure, like the response to a question or the number of clicks. So speaking of single measures, this example here is called the Net Promoter Score. It's a system and it's meant to it's meant to track likely word of mouth. The Net Promoter Score system is a score that reflects your customer's satisfaction and the actions they're willing to take due to that satisfaction. So it's calculated by seeing what percentage of your customers are promoters versus those that are detractors. It's based on the question, how likely is it that you would recommend brand to a friend or colleague? Having a high NPS score is good because that means you have happy customers who are more willing to promote your product to others. Good for lead generation. However, if they're dissatisfied or even just neutral here, this word of mouth can harm your brand because potential customers may turn away based on that first customer. That yellow band is actually what's called passives. These are customers that are somewhat satisfied but are very liable to be taken away by competitors. So you like this little video about exploring and explaining it based on a little napkin drawing. Here's another way they track customer satisfaction. IKEA is one of many places using these kinds of machines to encourage customers to quickly rate their satisfaction with something. In this case, it was the wait time at the checkouts. Notice how they use both color and smiley faces rather than rely on words. Technically, you don't even need to really read the words on the sign to know what they probably want you to do. Albeit the data may be a bit messier, but it's likely to still be close given sometimes the overall experience can affect how people are satisfied with particular attributes, say those wait times. So consider, what are ways you might be able to evaluate customer satisfaction for different touch points or previously ignored parts of the consumer process? New technology means there's always new ways to find out. So the following research discusses how our expectations can impact our satisfaction in very odd ways. Sometimes an organization may want to warn consumers of potential negative experiences in a set of experiences. Why? Well, consumers actually feel more positive with the overall set of experiences. How so? Well, uncertainty resolution. Will the bad happen? gives relief or even pleasure. A happy ending for that part after all. A major issue with experiences can be hedonic adaptation as well, where we get used to a certain level of happiness, making it less effective where we take things for granted. Being primed that we could have a bad thing happen makes us actually reset and rethink our baseline, as opposed to thinking, well, that could have gone better. Implication? Well, product defects do happen, and the article suggests how peanut M&Ms do rarely have rotten nuts, or you could get a scratch on your DVD disc back on your DVD rental from Redbox or Netflix. Back when, Netflix actually sent them. Well, actually, they still do. Consumers can stem hedonic adaptation by considering a negative possibility, and a few negative reviews may be a good thing. Again, given, of course, you don't have a systematic issue. In sum, determining satisfaction has a lot to do with all those internal and external factors from earlier. Now let's talk the counterpoint, dissatisfaction. So you've fallen short of expectations whether they expected it or not. Now what do consumers do? The following chart has a handy set of activities a consumer may do. You can see how they may take one or many actions. When a consumer is dissatisfied, the most favorable consequences for the person to communicate this to you and no one else. Instead, it's usually the opposite, where they tell you, but they'll tell everyone else. It doesn't help either when companies often make it difficult to complain or are unresponsive to complaints. So here's an example from United that isn't effectively United. United has had quite a few bad PR events, and this is one, for example, that they're not likely to live down either, because us marketers love to use examples, and this video is at least a little more humorous than the rather gruesome one when that poor passenger was forcibly removed a few years back. So Dave Carroll, a musician, witnessed the demise of his guitar due to far too rigorous handling by luggage personnel. What was worse was that the claims process was such that he was out of luck. He therefore made a set of songs, the first detailing the saga of his guitar, and the second reminding people to not be too harsh on the airline representatives, with their hands tied to the poor policies decided by higher-ups. The videos are there, and no, I'm not sure why or what's the story behind the odd costume choice or lack of singers, but it's a very good illustration of what or how the dissatisfaction process is handled. In sum, consumers don't have to be musicians to engage in word of mouth. Instead, consumers have new ways to spread the word about their experiences. Organizations must likewise make use of more tools to manage that complaint process. So here's a quick question. In what way should a firm respond to a complaint? Should they use a cognitive or emotional appeal when addressing grievances? Well, budding research suggests that when they're angry, cognitive tends to work better, and when they're emotional, when they're worried, emotional style appeals tend to work better. Whether and how the other boundary conditions take place is still a matter of research. There's lots of research out there because unfortunately there's always lots of examples out there. Let's talk a response that's not highly regarded, squashing customers' complaints. In 2014, the Union Street Guest Hotel came under public pressure when it was found that they would institute a $500 fine to the wedding party security deposit for every negative review. Whether a joke, as they called it, or not, it led to a lot of bad reviews on Yelp. They have since closed, but here's my screen cap of their webpage policies for posterity. There were already issues with this given its non-expected clause in a contract, which is already put on shaky ground legally. The Better Business Bureau actually barred their use, and Yelp started posting warnings to users when an organization was known for using them. As an update, Congressman Lance proposed a bill and it was signed into law by President Obama in 2016, and it was called the Consumer Review Fairness Act, so that those contract clauses that may limit a person's ability to make a review, or perhaps the clause heavily penalizing a review, are now off limits. Hasn't stopped some hotels though. The Indiana Attorney General sued a hotel very recently for doing just that and charging $350 for a bad review, and the guest was told she would be sued for libel, in fact. A key way to impact dissatisfaction is, of course, shape the expectations before they become a problem. You can do this, of course, by creating reasonable expectations through promotional efforts or maintaining consistent quality so that the reasonable expectations are actually fulfilled. So here's an example where Amazon always shows you what the shipping would normally cost, and that's that free saver shipping or Amazon Prime shipping that was paid for. Another example, theme parks or other services will overestimate wait times a bit. Airplanes tend to add padding to the flight time so that even if they are late, they can still get you there mostly on time. So you can also consider that the way you manage expectations will differ based upon if a breach happened before or if it's after a breach. Let's do a few more examples to round out responding to consumers. Here we have a few Steam's games, effectively. So these are Steam's refund. This is Steam's refund policy. So per the section on disposition, Steam is a platform that sells and distributes PC games where you no longer get a physical copy of the disc, but instead purchase your game where it stays in the Steam library ready to be used. As they note here, the refunds are for any reason, as long as the request was made within 14 days of purchase and the title has been played for less than 2 hours. However, you can also see that you can ask for a refund anyway and we'll take a look. Kind of is meant to be nice and inviting. You can see how this flexibility can help build loyalty to the Steam service, but also give them a bit more work. But again, it's very inviting and it helps build that relationship. So here are two examples to think of. The first is of a success. A user who played the game Firewatch, and they relatively enjoyed it, but weren't sure if it was still worth the price, and wrote about his experience on the Steam discussion boards. One of the Firewatch game developers wrote to him in the discussion board about the work put in, and he ended up deciding he would not pursue a refund and just keep the game instead. Second, more of a disaster. No Man's Sky was a video game that had very high expectations behind it, which made for some very dissatisfied customers, to put it lightly, when it was released. There was a great deal of confusion on news sites and discussion boards like Reddit whether refund policies would be changed or not. What got confusing for many is that technically Steam's policies still stood. It was just a matter that they would continue to review cases. So you can look at some of the ways how the resolution process may take place. The organization users would like consistent rules alike, but you have to design them for all stakeholders involved. Consumers would, of course, like to have things their way, but they just at least want a fair deal. So consider how Steam has to account for both the game developers and those consumers when building its return policy. So in sum, strategists must anticipate different avenues that consumers may express dissatisfaction and how they'll respond once that's the case. So let's, the next slide section will wrap up with commitment to cycle renewed, where we'll talk loyalty, but in general, I hope you're having a good day or evening so far. In this section, we talked quite a bit about post-purchase satisfaction, some of the determinants and outcomes, and ways that we really have to anticipate all the ways that we have to manage this as a process, because the response and evaluations are practices and they tend to lead to more CB practices. So with that, hope you're getting and looking at some ideas, and that I encourage you to run with them and see where they lead. Take care.